So I had a question sent in. Let's let me get it. Um, Now it's from somebody, and English is not their first language. They say, "I'm really fascinated by your story and your work. Thank you. I have lots of limiting beliefs that have kept me isolated for many years. I'm trying to break out of this. Is it more helpful to identify initial traumas and understand what they're teaching me, or is it better to use a kind of hypnosis to rewrite those limiting beliefs? I've trouble with intimacy. I really long for a girlfriend who understands me and can partner with me, but I seem not to have the patience to give. This is the same on a larger scale. I don't feel anything valuable to give others. I think they mean I don't feel I have anything valuable to give to others. And I don't feel wanting to help others, as I can just barely help myself. And I don't feel wanting to help others as I can just barely help myself. Right. Now my wife is just can hear my dogs barking. If you can't hear them, great. But that's my dogs barking. My wife's just come into the house. So there's quite a bit in that question. It's kind of two bits. There was the bit about the trauma, and there's the bit about giving and wanting to give. So should I identify the initial traumas and understand what they're teaching me? Trauma is a funny thing. There's so many levels to trauma and aspects to it. The touch is a huge component in trauma in terms of helping to release it. Now, unfortunately, at the present time, it's very hard to get touch therapy that can really help because everybody has to wear the masks and it's very clinical and very removed. So it's tricky, but it is very powerful because trauma gets, there's the bit of trauma that we can remember, and then there's the trauma that's locked in our cells, in the cells of our body. Now, if that sounds a bit hard to get your head around, if you think of, I mean, they're not used very much now, DVDs. Well, you could think of your phone, really, your phone, and watching a movie on your phone and crying about it and getting really upset about it. And when you look at your phone, it's just bits of plastic and metal. Like, it's just nothing really. But yet you're crying and you're getting upset. So your cells of your body are a lot more complicated than bits of plastic and metal. So it's not it's not hard for me anyway to think that they could, in the same way that your phone could store the movie or stream the movie. The movie comes through your phone, you have bits of plastic and metal and silicone and whatever else is in there. It's not hard for me to understand that your cells could hold the memory just in your cells and then, under the right circumstances, release that memory with everything. And you could be crying and they mightn't be up in your brain. Well, your brain's just made of cells as well. So having some kind of touch therapy, I mean, of course I'm going to say craniosacral because that's my field of expertise. But, there are other ways of doing it. But touch is powerful in helping to release trauma. Just even being held, physically being held, can release a lot. I'm not trying to make you feel worse about the no girlfriend thing, but I'm just, saying those kind of things can help. Then the other thing is not to define yourself by your trauma, because I've worked with loads of people, treated many, many people for trauma of one kind or another. And they, like most people, have trauma. Their traumas, in a way, shape us. They make us who we are, in a way. That's not to say they're good and that we shouldn't get rid of them or anything like that. But it's more a case of, particularly if you've had a profound trauma happen to you, it can be very easy to because it's had such an impact on your life, to feel like that if people only understood how traumatized I am, then I would, um, then they would know why I'm behaving the way I am. And how can I move on? How can I get on with my life when I have this huge trauma that happened to me and the injustice of it? And that's valid. It's valid. The injustice is valid for sure. But it can you can get stuck. You can get stuck in the trauma, and you can it becomes, rather than it being part of what made you, it just becomes you. It's like that's your story. Your story is of your trauma. Like I had pretty bad trauma happen to me when I was 3, and I didn't really remember it until I was in my late 30s, and it was really shocking to remember it. Um, and I can see how it would be. There's a space there for sure to kind of go, oh, hang on, where did I tell you what happened to me? You know, because most people, well, no, most people don't want to hear about it. Not because they don't care, but because it's like it's horrible. Who wants to hear that? Who wants to hear what happens to, a trauma that happened to a 3-year-old kid? I don't. I mean, I've sat with and worked with people gone through all sorts of traumas at all ages. It's never pleasant. So, and that's, the therapist is trained to do that. So your average person in a social situation does not want to go there because they probably have trauma themselves and they don't want to. Your trauma reflects their trauma. It's like, oh no, where's the drink? Where's the alcohol or the drugs or whatever? So yeah, don't let the trauma define you. And then a more empowering way to kind of view your trauma and everything about it is to take responsibility for it. And I don't mean that in a harsh kind of take responsibility, grow up. I don't mean it like that at all. I mean, it's a choice. Like, you can feel like it happened to you or you happened to it. It's really up to yourself. Meaning, I talk about this in my book, Why Do We Get Sick? Why Do We Get Better? And how I arrived at this was through working with people with terminal or life-threatening, not terminal, life-threatening conditions. Because the question of why does one person get sick and another person not get sick, that was something I've always been very interested in my adult life. And why somebody would go into life-threatening, I I found that very fascinating because I wanted to help the person because they'd come to me for help, but I didn't really understand what was going on because you know just in the craniosacral work that I was doing, there was kind of 3 levels or 2 levels really. There was like physical things, like the person fell down, or they hurt themselves, or they had an accident. So it was really that was between themselves and the environment. Something happened to them, or maybe they had emotional issues. Um, so their parent did something, said something to them when they were a child, hurt them in some way or another, not physically, just emotionally. And then that trauma would print out physically. So they might come with migraines or back pain or something like that. And then it was coming from this root cause in an emotional issue. Whereas it was like, no, I fell down when I was 10. That was a physical thing. The trauma was just the physical trauma. And the physical trauma would still be printing out in their body. And then there might be an emotional problem, and that might be printing out physically. And then there were people with life-threatening stuff. And that seemed to be, it had an emotional component, it obviously had a physical component, but it seemed like there was something more going on. Some mysterious, another layer underneath the emotional stuff. And, I mean, I I have a predisposition towards spiritual things and spiritual life, but I wouldn't call this area spiritual, because it didn't matter whether the person was spiritual or not, or into spiritual things. It still was still in this area. So I would just kind of think of it as in the mystery. It was in the mystery of the person. And as I looked into it, what was going on? Why would this person have a life-threatening condition and not that person? It got into, it sort of became clearer about what I call the question. So to sort of get an idea of it, I always think of like a kid running in the back garden or the backyard. And they just love to run and jump all day, running and jumping. Yay, I love running and jumping. That's just all they did all summer. And then towards the end of the summer, they're just running by the window, and through the window they see the TV, and on the TV is the Olympics. And on the Olympics is this event, the hurdling event, where they jump over the hurdles. And the kid is just transfixed by this image of the people running over the hurdles. They're like, wow, because this is like running and jumping heaven to this kid. And he can't believe like how many hurdles they're able to jump over, and she can't believe how fast they're going, and they're going, wow, I wonder if I could be that good. I wonder how good I could be at doing that thing. And that sticks in their mind. I wonder how good I could be at hurdling, which is another way of saying how good I could be at running and jumping. So they, tell their parent, and they join a local athletics club, and one thing leads to another, and they're pretty good at it, and they win their local races, and then they win their regional races and national races, and then lo and behold, 10 years later or whatever, they find themselves at the Olympics in the, I'm going to guess here, 400-meter hurdles. I don't know how long those races are. The big hurdles race, just before the starter pluses the gun. Pluses the gun, fires the gun. And what's happened is they have adopted a lot of restrictions. They can only run between the lanes. They can only jump over hurdles that are a certain height. They can't just go when they feel like it. They have to wait for the starter to fire the gun. They, get into the little block things before they start. And there's a finish line. So there's a lot of constraints that has, what started off as very free running and jumping, has become very constrained. And all to the service of this question that they had: how good can I be at running and jumping? So just hold that for a minute. When if you ask anybody, and I've asked loads of people these questions, and I'm going to ask you them now, right? Most people, well, I'll ask you the questions first, right? And so, why were you born the gender you were born? Why were you born to the parents you were born? Why were you born in the location that you were born in? Why were you born at this time, and at the time you were born, and not another time? Now, most people, if you ask them in a social situation, they'll be like, well, I don't know, But most people, in their heart, while they don't have an answer for those questions, they don't think it's random. Even hardcore, atheists or science, people who are really into science, will kind of go, oh yeah, it's all random. But somewhere to themselves, looking in the mirror, they feel there's a significance to those questions. They don't know what the significance is, but they feel that there is a significance. So, in my experience, you could think of your life, as similar to that running and jumping kid at the Olympics. And that all the answers to those questions, why you chose the gender you you chose, why you chose the parents, the location, the time, are all voluntary constraints that you adopted to help you answer a question about yourself. The kid's question was, how good could I be at that? Your question is individual to you. Again, this comes from my experience of working with people with who the life-threatening stuff seemed to always be to do with this question. And it's not like everybody has the same question and we're all just trying to figure it out. No, it's not been my experience. And what the question is different for everybody. And it's a paradox because it's unknowable and yet you have to wonder about it. And the longer you live, the more all the circumstances in your life seem to rotate around this question. And like, I don't know what my question is, but I regularly wonder about it. And the trick is to wonder about it gently, to tread lightly with the wondering. Because as I say, it's a paradox. You have to ask, but then you can't go insane if you don't get the answer. Because, people who've read my book and they're like, oh, I think I know what my question is. I'm like, oh, that's great. But I have a feeling that we don't want to know the answer. On that deep level, we don't want to know the answer. Like somebody coming up to that kid just before the starting pistol went and said, you know what? You're going to win this. I've come back from the future to tell you you're going to win this race. While that would be nice, some part of the kid would be, you probably know this in your own experience. Not everybody's like this. Some people like to know the ending of movies, but most people don't. Most people, when you say to them, oh yeah, I saw that, it's great what happens at the end, they go, stop. Don't tell me the end. And you go, no, it's good. I mean, it gets very scary and you think it's not going to go well, but it's a really, and if they tell you the end, you're like, oh, for God's sake. And you're like, and they'd be like, well, why? I thought you'd want to know. Like, I got very distressed when I thought they weren't going to make it, but they do make it. You're like, oh, that's it. I'm not going to even watch the movie now. Because there's something about, we're not actually interested in the end, the end, knowing the story. We're interested in the experience of watching the movie. So I think it's the same with life. I think we want to experience life, our life, the unfoldment of our life, without knowing what it is. There's something that captivating about the mystery of our life, about the not knowing. In script writing, they call it jeopardy. Well, it's one of the things they call it. Jeopardy, like if there's no jeopardy, it's not that exciting. So on the one hand, you have to be wondering, what is my question? And then on the other hand, you have to understand that you're never going to know the answer to that. And those questions I asked at the beginning, it's not just limited to those. You can expand that to everything in your life, which is beautiful, I think, because it means that you can take full responsibility for everything. Not because it's your fault, or not because you did it, or not because you can see how you did it, but it's just you just decide to accept responsibility for it, or take responsibility, and you go, yeah, everything that happened, I made all this happen. I made it all happen because I've got this question that I want to answer about myself. I don't know what it is, but I made all this stuff. I've got all these clues, about what it might be about, right? And abuse and trauma and everything like that fits into it. And again, let me just restate, I'm not diminishing trauma or abuse or anything awful that happened to you. Of course I'm not. But for me, looking at this in this way feels a lot better than feeling like just being blown around by the wind for no apparent reason. And I don't really mind whether I'm right or not, because I enjoy it more. I enjoy my life more when I look at it from this perspective. Because people can get very obsessed about that they want to know what's really, really, really real. And it's a bit like Don Juan talking about the table. It's like it's under the table and it'll blow your mind. So if you touch off it, you're doing great. But mostly it's just what's on the table, whatever. So, and it's a perspective. So I just like the perspective that about this question and this wondering. So I choose it. I just choose to view my life in that way. And I don't think I'm right or wrong. It's just a choice. And again, that is a bit like what I was saying about treading lightly. So you can view your initial traumas in that perspective. And then I think you'll miss some of the potential of them if you just rewrite them without exploring them in this kind of context. But yeah, if they're too much and it's too overwhelming, sure, yeah, try hypnosis. If it's really important to you in your to this question, to this part of you, they'll come back anyway. You won't be able to rewrite them because this question, I'm just calling it that, drives your life, in my experience. It is kind of ruthless. Like it will, it'll make a person very sick if they lose interest in their question, or they get very, distracted by it, or it's too hard. They don't want to, and these are not judgments. These are just my observations. And they're my observations based on, like when I was working with people, of course I'm working with them physically, or, distance-wise, it doesn't really matter. But there's working with them with behind the scenes, let's just call it that way, whether that's, hands-on physically or distance physically or whatever. And like when, like, it's not like I was like, okay, so let's just figure your question out. It wasn't so much that. It was just for me to sort of have a sense of where the root cause of the problem was. Was it physical, was it emotional, or was it this deeper thing? And if it was in this deeper thing, it was like, oh, okay. So it was almost like, wandering around in the dark and coming across this room, this doorway on the mystery or this person's question, and the root cause is in here, and I go, oh, okay. And it wasn't a case that the door was never open for me to go in there. It was more a case of like, that's where this is resolving. Like, okay, fine. I would work from the outside. And as the person got reconnected with it, or more in tune or more harmonious with whatever that their question was, their symptoms would go away. And they would get physically better, and they would get more in alignment with all that. So it's very powerful. So you could try and use hypnosis to get rid of your those beliefs. And if it's important to you for your question to include them, they'll just come back. And if it's not important, they'll be gone, and it'll be great.